โมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะพุทธังธัมมังสังฆังนะมัสสามิ Blessings to you all. One of our habits as human beings is we're always planning our next move, our next activity, our next trip, our next action. It's not necessarily wrong to do that, but it does draw us into a position where we're easily frustrated when our plans don't come to fruition. And the more hope and importance we give to our plans, the more suffering we have when they don't come to fruition, when obstacles arise. So of course this period of pandemic has thrown many people's plans into disarray and created frustration. But even without pandemics, that is already and has already been happening, taking place in our life. And Buddhists often come to monks and they say, I've got an event, what's a good day for it? What's a good day for my surgery, for opening my new shop, having a house blessing, doing this, doing that? You know, we always like to have the auspicious day, the lucky day. And it's not, again, not completely wrong to think in that way. It can be helpful to bring up a positive attitude, but of course the Buddha was always, in his teaching, he was pointing us to the deeper truths of life. And really any moment or any day when you do good is a good day, a good moment. And he encouraged us not to bind ourselves up with thoughts of the future, plans, and becoming too fixed in that way. What is auspicious, what is a good day, what's a bad day? Because even in the worst situations in life, if we are keeping our mind in a wholesome state, using our intelligence to understand things, reason things, bringing up mindfulness so that we have presence of mind, keeping precepts, bringing up thoughts of kindness, generosity, compassion. If we can do that at any time, even in the worst situation, then we are doing good for ourselves and others. And the practice of the Dhamma is not bound by time or space. It's akaliko, timeless. One of the things we learn, particularly from developing the practice of bhavana meditation, is that the opportunity to improve our state of mind, improve our understanding of truth, release ourselves from an experience of suffering is always there, open to us, even in the most extreme situations. But it's up to us to put things into practice, to realize that, and to realize it through our efforts in the practice. And one of the truths of suffering is that when we're not mindful and we're caught into an experience of stress, worry, fear, greed, anger, we don't see that. We're deluded at that moment, so we don't see the way out yet. And so we, at that moment, just believe our thoughts and our feelings and our emotions. Don't see anything beyond it. And because we don't see anything beyond, then we don't look for anything beyond, and we just get stuck into our state of mind. And that doesn't mean to say you're always having extreme experiences of stress and suffering in your life. This can also be just very small moments of discontent, restlessness, confusion that we experience and get lost in. And you'll notice that in any time when you come to practice meditation. Our basic aim in the practice of meditation is to bring up, number one, bring up mindfulness and clear comprehension. Putting effort into that. But of course that will expose or reveal to us the moments when we're not mindful. And that's why the practice is very frustrating, and we get tired of it, bored with our restless mind, fighting with the mind. It's a struggle sometimes. But that's always teaching us something, isn't it? The moments where you lose your mindfulness and get caught into another train of thought, it's teaching you something, particularly at the moment where you re-establish mindfulness again. Because if you are truly mindful, then you become aware and know at that moment where you've regained your mindfulness, say back with the breath if you're doing breath meditation, you're seeing that you can do that. It's an achievement. It's something very good in your life to be able to see and know at that moment that you've established mindfulness where you were previously not mindful. And that may take place many times in the course of a period of meditation. Mindful for a while with the breath, aware, clear, then you lose it and lost in a mood, daydreaming or falling asleep. But then you re-establish again at some point, sooner or later. But the idea is to have the clarity, the mindfulness, the clarity, the awareness to see this is re-establishing mindfulness. This is something I can do. And you'll gain more self-confidence and experience in the practice by recognizing that simple fact. And it is a very simple fact. Coming back to the breath, letting go of whatever you were previously caught up with in the mind. That's teaching you that you can do it. And even though you may have to do it many times to practice and train your mind, the more you do it, the more confidence you have and can have is that it can be done. This is something I as a human being can do. I can let go of my distracting thoughts, feelings, moods. I can let them go if only briefly. And a refinement of that, or a deepening of that experience, is that as you do it more often, well, maybe you can let go for longer periods more successfully. Another problem we face as we meditate is that you let go of something that was bothering you or agitating your mind. You return to the breath, maybe become more clear, more calm. But a part of the mind is saying, oh, it'll only be a moment and then I'll be lost again. You know, we're already undermining our own efforts by slipping back into negative thoughts. But all of this is to be observed and learnt from as we meditate. To learn from that habit of becoming more negative. The habit of judging ourselves as we meditate. Judging our efforts, judging who we think we are, the disappointments, when we would like to be different, things to be different than they are, the frustrations with what we have to put up with in our mind, in our experience, and so on. All of this we're learning from. And we can get better at it with practice. And we have to constantly remind ourselves that we can let go because we've done it before. We can train the mind to pay attention to the breath and keep it in mind because we've done it before. And keep building on that. Little by little we will learn because of the clarity it brings. And in the hierarchy of human experience, this is the best of human experience, although at first we might not realize it. Any moment in any day when you bring up mindfulness, re-establish your clarity, your awareness in the present moment, you know yourself in that moment. That is, you're getting close to the summit of human experience, the peak, the best. Because it's from this place of being mindful, knowing yourself in the present moment, that all the other good things that human beings can experience come from. And particularly the wisdom, the understanding that ultimately frees us from suffering completely, comes out of that experience of becoming aware, knowing your body, your mind in the present moment. And that's why we practice, is to keep experiencing that. And it's from there that the mind becomes brighter, more confident and happier, even though there are still many obstacles to face. And we gradually grow from that moment, that place where we're establishing mindfulness. It can be in the morning, in the evening, the middle of the night, it doesn't matter. Again, the Dhamma is timeless. It's whether the mindfulness is established and our wisdom and intelligence can start to function and learn from experience or not. And it can be any time of day or night. It's just like here, behind this hall I'm sitting in, there's a pond. And if you notice this pond, there are plenty of times through the day when the wind or the breeze blows and the water ripples on this pond, the surface of the pond becomes stirred up by the wind, and you can't see through the water at that time. But then there's also plenty of times when the wind dies down and the surface of the pond becomes still. That's those times you can look into the water and see clearly if there's any fish or there's plants, whatever's in there. And this is what the Buddha was encouraging us to develop in our lives regularly, constantly. Come back to this place of clarity, because that's where the good in our lives comes from, ultimately. And this place of clarity, where there's mindfulness, there's quality of knowing, there's nobody who actually owns it. So it's not something you're trying to develop as a possession. It's simply the correct way to develop this mind, train it, in order to free it from suffering. And we have this habit from our upbringing, our culture of education and going to work, trying to earn money, and get on in life and become somebody. We have this habit that we associate happiness and success with getting something, having something. having certain experiences, gaining certain knowledges, gaining all kinds of things from the world. But this is a different kind of happiness and a different kind of experience where you're not trying to gain something. The quality of knowing is impersonal. It's empty of self, so we sometimes call it emptiness of the mind. And it's not that the mind has anything. Even, we use the words knowing the breath, knowing the mind, being aware in the present moment. These are pointing to the truth, but the experience itself is not something you gain or have. It's not a possession. It's actually the most natural experience possible. The more you have the experience of knowing yourself with mindfulness, clarity and wisdom, the more you realize it's just the natural state of the mind, and that everything else is unnatural, that comes into the mind and kind of adds on to our experience, and that's where suffering, confusion, problems come from. And what we add on to just this natural awareness of the mind. So when we do start looking to have something, gain something from our experience, to be somebody, suffering comes, because it's unnatural, it's unsustainable. So you'll notice, as you do practice mindfulness and investigate and examine more closely what's going on in your mind, you'll notice that when you do have this experience of wanting or grasping or trying to have anything, it's setting yourself up for suffering. And when you start to let go, unravel that experience, let it go, relax is part of it, relaxing, but not just relaxing, but consciously letting go of what you're trying to grasp onto, you actually achieve the peace, the happiness. But the sense of self is disappearing at that moment. There's a saying Ajahn Chah used to say, he said, if we suffer, or you suffer because you're wanting. You suffer a lot because you indulge the mind that wants things. You hold on to that state of mind, you dwell on it, you indulge it. You suffer a little when you stop the wanting mind, and you completely end suffering when you completely let go of the wanting mind. In order to understand that process, you've got to be able to watch what's going on in your mind, to practice this and develop this quality of knowing so you can see what is leading to what. Where is the experience of agitation and suffering coming from? To recognize wanting, the quality of wanting, trying to get, trying to have, possess, is actually a cause of suffering. You have to see that from a place of clarity, place of knowing, awareness. And it's important to see that once we are establishing mindfulness, then we have to look and examine the truth. We have to come back to look at our experience a little bit more closely and over again. And as you do that, you start to reveal to yourself what's going on in your mind. Why do I feel stress, agitation, despair, frustration, disappointment? It's because I'm holding on and indulging this quality of wanting. Wanting can be kind of positive or negative. It's wanting things you haven't got, or wanting to get rid of what you have got that you don't like and is unpleasant. But as you start unraveling this and looking at it, what are you noticing? Well, the Buddha said if you look carefully, what precedes wanting, what sets your mind up to want, to have, to get, or to get rid of, is feeling. Nowadays we say feeling is like the tone of your experience, meaning pleasant feeling, pleasure, or unpleasant, painful feeling. And in the middle there's neutral, neither pleasant nor unpleasant. But when the mind is not very aware, even feeling that's neither pleasant nor unpleasant tends towards dullness, which is another form of suffering. But pleasurable feeling and the experience of pleasure brings a certain kind of wanting, doesn't it? I like that. I want that. I want more of that. I want to keep it, possess it. I want to be able to get it whenever I want. Of course, there's a whole range of pleasurable feelings we can have with this body because we've got 6 senses. So we've got the 5 external senses, and then there's the memories and thoughts based on previous experience of those 5 senses. So if there's nothing immediately to hand, and you'll know this when you practice meditation, you can imagine it, bring it into existence by imagining things that bring you pleasure and wanting more of that. We give importance to it, we value it, we set up habitual ways of thinking and remembering so that we can experience more of that pleasure. We have all our reasons for it, we justify it. You know, I can experience pleasure, therefore I shall. It's my right, I'm entitled to have pleasure. And in one sense, of course you are, that's your right, your mind, your pleasure. But here we're not looking at it in that way, we're looking at the process of how suffering arises in the mind. And even though you're entitled to your pleasures, what you also have to look, say, the next step on is to say, well, but this pleasure that I am wanting and grasping hold of leads on to suffering. It feeds discontent. When I don't have the pleasure, I want it. When I've got it, I'm afraid I'm going to lose it. So feeling has this side to it. There is pleasure, and we easily become seduced by pleasure of all different kinds. We want it, it's seductive, it's attractive, but then that sets us up to suffer when we don't have it or can't get it, or we're afraid we're going to lose it. That's where your wisdom and the reflective part of the mind has to look and understand why the Buddha said wanting is a cause of suffering. The more we want, the more we suffer. And then having a mind that is no longer wanting would, it would seem, be a mind free of suffering. Pain is just the same, painful feeling. For the unmindful, unaware state of mind, it sets up trains of thought and emotion reactions of displeasure. I don't want this painful feeling. It's quite natural, and again, you could say, well, it's my right, I don't want pain, I don't like pain, I'm not here to have a painful existence. But it comes, doesn't it? It comes to us, often without warning, without planning, and not in the way we like. Because part of this existence as a human being is bound up with painful feelings. Human body cannot sustain constant pleasure, much as we would like it to, and we try to get as much pleasure out of it as we can quite often. It can't do it. It brings us some painful experiences as well. The question is, how are we going to deal with those painful experiences when they come? How are we going to prepare ourselves? Are we able to learn from this set of facts and information that's coming to the mind, whether it's pleasant or unpleasant, pleasure and pain? These are, in their essence, in their true nature, they're just experiences, phenomena. Pleasant feelings arising through their own set of causes, conditions. Unpleasant feelings arising through their own set of causes and conditions. But when we're not aware, we take ownership of them. We grasp at them. It sets off this train of thought, wanting or not wanting, liking or disliking. And this is where we have to investigate to understand more deeply where suffering is coming from. And you'll notice as mindfulness becomes more continuous, more stronger as you meditate, it helps us to shows us that it is actually possible to know pleasure and know pain, but not let it trigger wanting and grasping. And this is where we're learning in our practice of meditation to be a little bit more patient and to investigate and examine more closely what is going on, using this natural state of awareness that we keep returning to and developing through the practice. And particularly, you might find some results with being with pain, because so much of our life is about reacting to pain with aversion, discomfort, dislike. And if you're going to learn to be mindful of painful feeling and see it as just feeling, without taking ownership of it and grasping at it and reacting to it, that immediately and very quickly will free you up from a lot of stress and suffering in life. So just examine something like ill will, anger. So much of our anger that we experience that comes with painful feeling. So much of that we can quickly get beyond, let go of, if we establish mindfulness and just recognize what is going on. So with the behavior of other people, what they say and do, and so much of our anger comes from that, doesn't it? What other people have done, what they've said. What we're really doing when we see or hear what other people have done, or just think about it, remember it, what we're really doing is setting ourselves up to suffer internally by reacting to the painful feeling that may come through witnessing, knowing about, remembering the conduct, the behavior of other people that we find this unsatisfactory, wrong, bad, whatever way you judge it. What is actually happening is you see, you hear, or you remember, it brings up unpleasant feeling, and then we start to think angry thoughts. So if you stop, in a moment in time and observe what's going on in that way, someone says something, for example, they say something you don't like, don't agree with. There's the hearing, and then there's a painful, however subtle, unpleasant feeling arises, and it will prompt some negative reaction, some mental proliferation and agitation, discontent. Usually it will come out in terms of thinking, maybe thinking a lot if you're very angry. But if you just freeze that moment in time and you say, what you're really doing is making yourself suffer because of what other people have said and done. It's not them making you suffer, it's you suffering because you're grasping at that painful feeling that has arisen because of the words or the images that have come into your mind. You grasp, you identify with the feeling, and you start thinking in a negative way, and quite often overthinking, endlessly thinking in negative ways, and it feeds itself, which feeds more unpleasant feeling, which feeds more negative thinking. It's kind of a self-perpetuating process sometimes. But this has got nothing to do with some other person, what they've said or done, near or far, right with you now or in the past. None of that is true. They aren't the cause of that. What's actually happening is your mind is grasping at that unpleasant feeling and having mental proliferation, trains of thoughts based on it. And then from then on you've got memories as well, so you can bring it up again, over and over again, bash yourself over the head, or really experience painful feelings, unpleasant mind states. And you're doing it to yourself, hurting yourself. And you can imagine if you're doing that through your life regularly, and I think we do a lot, then it will often get worse, won't it? It'll get more, come up more frequently, more frequently, more easily, more quickly. Which is why the Buddha encouraged us to practice developing more mindfulness and insight, so that we can change that dynamic. To have enough patience and put enough effort into bringing up mindfulness, so that instead of just always reacting to the painful feeling with negative trains of thought, is to have techniques and ways that at that moment you can establish mindfulness, maintain your mindfulness, and let those thoughts die away. The feeling may still be there, the unpleasant feeling, having experienced whatever other people have said or done, but the feeling is just a feeling. This is what we call, what the Buddha encouraged us to practice in his teaching, the 4 foundations of mindfulness. We say seeing feeling, or knowing feeling in the feeling. Another way of saying it is just let feeling just be feeling, rather than let it be a cause for your personal suffering. Your painful feeling is painful. There's no way around that. And you may just have to endure that until it passes. But all the negativity, the thinking that you grasp onto and is fed by that painful feeling, that's where we really suffer. And that's what feeds more states of, say, anger, ill will. Same with depression, disappointment. So often that comes from when we dwell on our own mistakes, failures, things that have happened to us that didn't go so well. We're clinging to a memory, say, of something that went wrong, our mistake, and the event has happened, been and gone, finished, and yet we keep bringing up the memory, going over it, and that memory brings the unpleasant feeling and then the negative thoughts, and we keep doing it, we indulge in it. So this is what we say, indulging in wanting. In this case, it's not wanting. I don't want to be one who made a mistake, did that wrong thing. But you've got the memory, and with unwise attention and a lack of mindfulness, just keep going over it and over it, so we become disappointed or depressed, say. Worry and anxiety is about the future is the same, isn't it? The future hasn't happened yet, but we're allowing our mind to dwell on negative perceptions, negative possibilities that may happen, things that may happen. They haven't happened yet, but we dwell on them, build them up, create an emotion around them, and suffer. because it brings an unpleasant feeling, anxiety about the future, some unpleasant thing that we may have to face will bring an unpleasant feeling, and then we identify and attach to that feeling, which brings up the not wanting. I don't want this feeling, but instead of establishing mindfulness, allowing it just to fade from the mind, we actually feed it, keep it going longer by getting caught into the negative thoughts around it, the unwholesome thoughts. As we do this, we are also feeding negative perceptions that come with that feeling, and sometimes it's the perception that we cling on to, and it will trigger the feeling again in the future. So if say it's a person that's done something bad, wrong, you've already associated their behavior with painful feeling and then your negative thoughts. Then in the future, another time, just the word, that person's name, or the thought of them, nothing unpleasant has happened yet, but just the name or the thought triggers that negative perception, triggers negative feeling, and the whole process is engaged again. And on it goes. So we attach to perceptions about ourselves, about our life, about other people. And again, if we're doing that unmindfully, it's like we're trapped in this self-sustaining process of always wanting. It works with pleasure as well. I want to get this. So we develop perceptions about the things we want, the attractiveness, how it's going to bring me pleasure, get me out of my troubles, solve all my problems, bring me that great happiness. And so we keep attaching to that perception, and that tends to trigger more frustration because you can't sustain it. The perceptions of pleasure don't last. They arise, they pass away. So we have some pleasure and we're looking forward to it. Often a lot of things we enjoy and find pleasure with in life are actually things that we've been looking forward to and thinking about, developing perceptions about them. And then actually the getting of the thing you want is maybe fairly brief kind of pleasure, not so much. It was actually the anticipation, the expectation, the build-up was what we were getting caught into. And that's all coming from perceptions, isn't it? This is going to be good. I really want this. This is going to make me happy. All of that is going on in the mind. The actual event, whatever it is, may involve external phenomena, people, places, different kinds of stimulating experiences. That may be over quite quickly. What is it? Maybe some sporting event. It's the build-up that you get caught into. The actual event may be just so-so. Maybe some pleasure as well, but then it's gone. I guess the best example would be something like 100 meters final in the Olympics. The build-up for days and days and days, and then the whole thing's over in 10 seconds. But that's what perception is doing us. It's almost like tricking us. The Buddha said it's like a mirage, an illusion. It tricks us into wanting, desiring, expecting, building up in our mind. And then it's gone, finished, over. And maybe you can't get it back again. These are examples of wanting based on the perceptions. This is negative, bad, wrong, brings a painful feeling. This is good, right, brings a pleasant feeling. And the mind is just being pushed around all the time. Often we're getting it wrong as well. When you practice more mindfulness, another thing you start to notice and it reveals to you is that your perceptions are often wrong. It's just out of habit that you perceive something in a certain way, but actually it's wrong. You've added on your own perception to an experience. It's like that story of the young girl who's got a couple of apples, and she's with her mum, And the mum sees her daughter, little daughter's got a couple of apples and says, "Oh, can I have one?" And then the daughter takes a bite out of each apple and then hands one to mum. And the mum's first reaction is disappointment with her daughter. "Oh, all I wanted was an apple and she's got two, and there she's gone and bitten each one." So she experiences disappointment, thinking her daughter is, a bit greedy, selfish. But the daughter then says, "Mum, you take this apple." Having tasted both, she said, "This is the sweetest." She wants to give the best apple to her mum. In that moment, the mum realizes, "Oh, I misjudged my daughter. I thought she was just being difficult or annoying or greedy." And she's actually tasting the apple to see which one is the sweetest one for me, out of love. Now, how often does that kind of misperception take place in your day when you're not mindful of how your own mind is holding on to perceptions, bringing them up, holding on to them out of past habit? So, if you're in the habit of looking at other people negatively, well, that may be the first perception that comes to mind, and with it there'll be an unpleasant feeling. And that becomes a habit, doesn't it? It could be someone you live with, often people we know quite well, people we live with, people we work with. If we're not very mindful, we tend to dwell on their faults. That's what fills our mind. We see the faults before the goodness. Or like earlier, I was getting you to meditate, recollecting some of the good things you've done. Why? Because our habit tends to be to remember our faults and the bad things we've done and the bad things that have happened and our frustrations and disappointments in life. Those perceptions tend to come up easily because we've held on to them, followed them before, identified with them before, and wanted based on those perceptions before. As we practice mindfulness, we have to look into that, examine that truth, that reality, and not let our mind get so tricked by its own habits. The untrained, the unmindful mind will tend towards negativity quite naturally. Tends towards delusion, greed, anger, and delusion, naturally, easily. Because we've done it before, we'll do it again. As we practice mindfulness, we can show ourselves what's going on. And like the water that becomes still and clear, then you can see more clearly what's going on. And you have to be honest as well and say, "Oh, this is my own thinking getting the better of me. I suffer because I think too much." When we're mindful, we don't think too much. We can still think, but now we can use mindfulness to guide it. And we can bring in clear comprehension and wisdom to help guide that thinking and to understand the truth better. And this is why I say Ajahn Kalyano used to give us these simple tips like, don't believe it straight away. Whatever you think, just pause and say, is this true? Is this correct? Maybe it's just another one of those false perceptions. It can be both, perceiving yourself as good or bad, perceiving another person as good or bad, a situation as good or bad, but it's kind of a reaction, a habitual reaction that will come up first, accompanied by a pleasant experience, pleasant feeling or an unpleasant feeling. He said, stop and watch what's going on. Some of our experiences are unpleasant, and we just have to be very patient with them, but don't let them trigger more of this mind of suffering, wanting to get rid of, wanting to get what it wants, wanting to get rid of what it doesn't want and doesn't like. Those are the habits that cause and make up our suffering in daily life. And this is what we have to look at as we meditate. You'll see when you have more mindfulness, you're in a position to sort of look at things in a more detached way, separate the mind. We say separating the mind and the feeling and the perception. and the body. Normally these things all seem to join together as a kind of a package. In mind, body, perception, feeling, all seem to be the one thing. And we go along with it. So pleasant feeling, we attach to that, grasp at that. Unpleasant feeling, we grasp at that. Mindfulness is bringing that clarity where you can actually stop and look and learn from your experience, and you can adjust your perceptions and adjust the way you think and look at things. So you might notice, say, just sitting here, very ordinary things you can learn from. Just sitting here and you have a pain in your leg, say, some part of your leg. Establish mindfulness. What's going on? I feel pain in my knee or in my muscle, in my leg. Ask yourself that question. Is the painful feeling, is it the body? Is it the muscle? Is it the knee? Is it the bone? What is it? Is it me? As soon as mindfulness is there, you can question like that and get a deeper understanding. There is feeling there. There's no one's denying there's painful feeling. But is it a person? Is it a being? Is it a me, mine, myself? Is it permanent? And you keep watching and that painful feeling will change. What usually happens is we give up watching first and we move or change our mood or our thought and distract ourselves. But if you're training in mindfulness, maybe you'll be willing to be a bit more patient and keep looking longer. That painful feeling may disappear. Temporarily, it may return, but temporarily you can see, it arises and it ceases. And you're becoming more aware of the mentality, what we call Dhamma. There's the rupa, the physical body, and then Dhamma is the mind. But there's the mind that knows, and then there's the thing that's the contents of the mind, the things that arise, the feeling, the perception. This is good, this is bad, this is mine. The thinking, mental formations. But the quality of mindfulness is revealing that all of those things are not actually belonging to a person or a self. They're not a being. They're just, each of them are there, just the component parts of your experience. This is why it's quite possible to be with a painful feeling arising from the body, or your leg, or a memory of an unpleasant experience. You can be with it, know it, but you don't have to suffer with it. So the Buddha was encouraging us to meditate like this regularly, develop mindfulness, investigate our experience, so that we're not always deluding ourselves, attaching to our perceptions, causing ourselves suffering, other people suffering, adding to the suffering of the world. He was encouraging us to look more deeply and find that place where there's knowing, clear knowledge and vision of the way things are. Because this is where suffering starts to fade. This is where we can let go. This is where we can put a stop to the mind that's endlessly wanting this, wanting that, never satisfied, never content. So maybe for tonight I'll leave you with these reflections, and we can, after this there'll be a time for Q&A.